on behalf of the Latino Corporate Directors Association. Welcome to our board-wise virtual session, where we generate ideas, insights, and interactions on topics that matter most to our network. And again, thank you for joining us. Today's session is Leadership Matters, and it's a fireside chat on the topic of healthcare on the front lines, leading through crisis. First, let me start by thanking Kaiser Permanente and the leadership team and their CEO for the long-standing partnership and support of LCDA's mission. Kaiser Permanente was with us when we launched our first annual board leaders convening. As you will remember, Ramon, that was in 2016. And, you know, that was just a groundbreaking event for us. So I really want to thank Kaiser for being there. And really what is outstanding about Kaiser is their reach and impact in the healthcare space. Kaiser Permanente is an $88.7 billion organization with more than 250 employees and physicians, serving 12.4 million members. And it runs 39 hospitals. If this was a publicly traded company, it would be 34th on the Fortune 1000 list. But certainly we have the experts here to tell you more about that and more. So Kaiser's commitment to diversity starts at the top. Kaiser's board of 13 includes 5 women and 5 people of color, including 2 Latinos. So Kaiser is leading the way in this area. So before we introduce our distinguished speakers, just a couple of housekeeping items. As we've all participated in many of these Zoom conversations, we will have, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat to let us know you've joined, let others know you've joined. Feel free to share parts of the conversation that you find interesting. Certainly post questions on chat. We will have, we might be able to pull some of those in during the conversation, but we'll have time for Q&A at the end as well. And in the Q&A portion, we will be happy to call on you because we want this to be interactive and want to see you as well and hear from you. So, so with that, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for the session. He is an LCDA member, Ramon Baez, of course, a board member of the Kaiser Foundation Health Plan and the Kaiser Foundation Hospitals. He joined the board in 2016. He's on that board. He's a member of the Community Health Committee and the Governance, Accountability, and Nominating Committee. Ramon retired from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise in 2016, where he served as a senior vice president, customer evangelist, and advocate for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. He also served as a chairman of HPE's Global Diversity and Inclusion Board, an entity that serves as a strategic governing body for diversity and inclusion. So with that, I also will introduce our featured speaker, which is Mr. Greg Adams. Greg is the chair and chief executive officer of Kaiser Foundation Health Plans. He assumed this role in December 2019 and has been, before that, has been with Kaiser for 20 years. Most recently, and before his current role, he was regional president of Kaiser Permanente, Northern California. So he's moved in several different roles at Kaiser, overseeing operations in all 8 Kaiser regions. He has held executive positions across the country since 1979. He earned his bachelor's degree from Oglethorpe University in Atlanta and a master's degree in nursing administration from Wichita State University. With that, I am going to turn it over to our esteemed moderator, Ramon Baez.
Great. Hey, thank you, Esther. It's really nice to see you again, and really terrific to see all my colleagues here as well. So it's for the ones that are on video. Well, it's truly a pleasure to be able to meet with Greg here today. You know, Greg had to deal with an incredible, unprecedented medical crisis when he started as the CEO and chairman of Kaiser Permanente. And as you all know, the healthcare system has been under crisis for the last year since the pandemic started in the United States. And so as you think about this, think of yourself being on the board. You have a new chair, a new CEO, and you're dealing with this 100-year pandemic. That's what I want you to think about. That's how I want to frame this for you. And with all the other things that took place subsequent to that, and all that with that Greg and his leadership team had to go through. So with that, hope we didn't put too much pressure on you, Greg, but with that, I'd like to start by, again, thank you, Greg, for being here. Thank you for taking the time to speak with all of us. And, you know, Greg, I know when you started your career, you started as a caregiver with a degree in nursing. That was something that I did not know when I first met you. And as time went on, I got to know you. Bernard would share that with Bernard Tyson would share that with us, why you were so empathetic towards what needed to be done as far as caregiving. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on that for us?
Sure. And Ramon, let me just say, one, I'm glad to be here, and I appreciate the history that Kaiser Permanente has had with the organization. And, you know, you and I are committed to that relationship continuing. And so I just want to kind of acknowledge everyone here for their leadership and let you know that we remain committed to this organization. So Esther asked me when we were off camera, kind of where I grew up. I grew up in a very small town outside of Atlanta, Carrollton, Georgia, West Georgia. And at the time, in my early childhood, it was pretty segregated. And my family had relationships with friends who were involved in healthcare. And there happened to be a female doctor, actually, who had entered nursing and came from a poor background and worked her way through medical school by first going to nursing and then using that as a way to launch. And so at 15, I entered nursing school. I was kind of a high achiever, if you will, and graduated from nursing school. I actually went through, at the time, I couldn't pass the state board because I was the youngest person to actually ever finish nursing school, and I had to wait until I could take boards. But went to work in Atlanta in a hospital there, actually, that we now have a relationship with, and worked as an emergency room nurse. And I, coming out of that kind of background of, you know, being challenged economically, I really saw healthcare as an opportunity to give back and to kind of be a part of something that was bigger than myself or larger than just being a business. So I think, to Bernard's point, I've always carried that. There's seldom a day that I'm not thinking about what's going on at our patient's bedside. So I was in the Atlanta market, worked in not-for-profit healthcare, worked in for-profit healthcare, and at 24, was actually offered my first chief operating officer's position in 2 hospitals. And when actually it was the board chair that found out my age and asked management to rescind the offer. So that wouldn't happen today, but it did happen then. So worked in, went to grad school, worked at the Mayo Clinic, worked in various Catholic organizations, moved to Southern California and began to really step into kind of a broader leadership role in healthcare, and have just continued to kind of advocate not only for kind of the business side and kind of own that, but at the end of the day, it's not about the business. It is about the business, and it is about the people that we're engaging with, and the people's lives that we're touching every day.
You know, Greg, I want to take us back to November of 2019. November of 2019, we had the untimely death of Bernard Tyson. He wasn't just our CEO and chairman. He was your good friend and colleague for over 20 years. And we were all pretty much in shock at that time. You took the reins as interim CEO immediately, and the board had to make a decision. Within 30 days, we needed to make a decision. Do we have you be that permanent CEO, or do we go out and look? And I'm so thankful that the board made the decision they did and selected you at that time, because none of us knew what we were about to come through, what was in front of us. And I just would like you to share with everybody what was going on in your mind, and what did you have to do as a leader of Kaiser Permanente, your executive team. You knew you needed to pivot at this time. You were already in the process of pivoting, and then you had the pandemic in front of you. What was going through your mind, and how did you use the board to help you get to where we are today?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, unexpected, Bernard Tyson, I understand that people knew, bigger than life, had an approach and kind of a style that in many ways kind of shaped who Kaiser Permanente was and has been over the past several years. And so, as you said, middle of the night, got a call, and we began to deal with the passing of Bernard. And at the same time, with an organization that needed to kind of go through this process, mourn, own what was happening, but at the same time, you know, we were in an environment that was rapidly changing. So I think, you know, part of our success in this transition was the fact that our board has a very robust succession planning process, and it's very intense, I must tell you. But we, myself and the board, Bernard and the board, really engage several times during the year, specifically at the end of the year, where there is a detailed discussion of our senior leaders, where they are, their growth opportunities, how we see them going forward. So I think Bernard and the board have done a very good job with that process as it came to me. And as we led through the transition, I remember Ramon sitting with the board and talking about the need for the organization to pivot. And I knew that this was going to be a bit of a moment for the board and for myself, because, you know, we were moving, and for me to come in and say, times are changing, things are occurring external to this organization that could put the organization at risk. And I intentionally used the word that if we were not to pivot, that we could end up being a legacy organization. And I remember a number of the board members' reaction to that. So that started us on a journey of how do we understand what is occurring externally in the healthcare world, in the world. How do we look outside in? Kaiser Permanente has been an organization that has, you know, is very focused internally and has been very successful. And yet, you know, technology, disruption, things were changing and are changing pretty rapidly. So I think the fact that we had a great succession plan, or a very robust succession plan. Two, I think the fact that the board is a very mature board, and a very seasoned and a very, very much a high functioning board. Our ability to engage on, yes, we've been successful and things are changing and there is a need for us to change. And pretty quickly, we together need to engage in a strategic planning process. So part of that was moving pretty quickly to update the board on what those risks and what those challenges were. I would say that, you know, there's certainly some skepticism, but the board pretty quickly understood the external market, engaged on what needed to occur, and we started, you know, a strategic planning process. And in that process, we were talking about how we needed to really become a single enterprise. Kaiser Permanente historically has been an organization with multiple regions, and there's been some leadership default to the regions. How we really needed to shift our culture and become more member-centric. And that because of that internal kind of focus, that we were not moving as fast as we needed to accelerate our response to the market and to make decisions. So the board was kind of there in terms of single enterprise, faster movement and decisions. And then, as you know, the pandemic hit.
Exactly. And I'd like to shift over to the pandemic for a second. You know, when that took place, and what I noticed as a board member, how your leadership, your executive team have just came together. I still remember where we were all going to fly in for a board meeting in March of 2020. And I think it was the day before all of us got on airplanes, we just decided we were going to do our first virtual board meeting. I will remember that it didn't go as smooth as it did as time went on, and we got really good at it. But, you know, just when you think about your new role and the pandemic started, what people may not be aware of on this call is that you not only lead Kaiser Permanente, you get called from the US Capitol, you get called from Sacramento. You're asked to give advice, and your leadership team is to give advice, and you actually put people of your leadership team on various committees, either at the US level or at the California state level. Can you just share with us how your team, how you were able to bring them together and think about who would be the best people to be on those committees to help drive what we needed to do during the pandemic, and how you worked with the board to be able to communicate what was happening on a timely basis?
Yeah, you know, as I said, we were kind of going through the process of doing a strategic plan. We're also going through the process of assessing the organizational structure and looking at kind of whether or not we were organized, focused, and did we have the right people in the right positions in order to kind of deal with where we understood the market to be going. And then the pandemic hits. And remember, the first phase of the pandemic was, one, we didn't know what we didn't know. Two, we were struggling with the supplies and the PPE. And I remember kind of sitting, actually kind of where I'm sitting now, you know, at 7 o'clock in the evening, having conversations with people across the country in China, trying to get masks, trying to get gloves, trying to get, anyway, trying to get all the equipment that was needed. And so one of the things that happened in a pandemic is, you know, the leadership style has to shift. KP is very much a consensus-driven organization. And so we needed to move pretty quickly to not so much command and control, but clearly command, and how do we make decisions faster, and how do we allow leadership at a national level to begin to set the direction and the pace. So, and remember this, so that really lined up with the strategic plan. How do we shift to one enterprise? So pretty quickly we were able to say, let's take advantage, of this in the sense of this is an opportunity to really come together as one, created a national command center, kind of organize that with our clinical leadership and our business administrative leadership, and begin to kind of pass policies, protocols, kind of to drive those throughout the organization. The other thing is, you know, Kaiser Permanente is this amazing organization in terms of data. We have more data probably than any healthcare organization in the country. So we were able to understand through our data, our call centers, our members, and what they were reaching out for in terms of symptoms. We were able to really understand when the pandemic had moved away from kind of containment to mitigation. And remember, very early on, it was about, let's just contain this. And when we saw the symptoms, you know, very early in our population at a national level, we were able to engage with the CDC, with CMS to say, let's look at our data. Let's understand kind of where the pandemic is. We developed national playbooks that we use not only in our hospitals and in our communities, but that we also shared at the state level and shared with the CDC and CMS. So I think Kaiser Permanente has always been this trusted source in terms of leading. But in this particular example, we were, because of our integration, because of our data, and I will tell you, I had the scientists and the data people right at my side, every day. Where are we? What are we doing? And then using that not only to inform what we were doing in the organization, but really using it to share with the state and federal organizations. And to your point, we made those people available. And for our commitment, our mission is that we're about the health of our members, the health of our communities, and the health of our nation. So we really see our role as being on the front line, engaging with decision makers and influencing, and in this case, really influencing how the state and the nation has responded to the pandemic.
Excellent. Just back on that a little bit. What were some of your key learnings? Because you've been in leadership for a long time. I mean, you've dealt with various crises and things like that over the years. So what were some of your learnings that you can maybe share with the members here?
Yeah, I would say, I think we all know the importance of visibility, and we all know the importance of communication. But I have to tell you that in the middle of a crisis like a pandemic, you cannot over communicate. You cannot, be overly visible. And there had to be a clarity of message that brought kind of purpose and meaning and alignment across the organization. So, this is really about, flying the plane or kind of building the plane while you're flying, as they say. But we pretty early came out with three kind of tenets that we wanted to continue to communicate to our employees. And the first one was that we would educate because we didn't know. So we would educate and provide kind of information to our employees and to our members as soon as we had it. So there was this constant educating and caring for our employees and our members. And it was really important that the employees understood that as they were kind of stepping into the situation, that we were there for them. And so, videos, rounding, kind of acknowledging employees that were on the front line. Two, for our employees and our physicians, it was important for them to know that we were committed to their safety to the best that we could be with the limited knowledge that we had. And so we did things like before we understood, kind of before we had testing up and running everywhere. If people had symptoms, we took them off for 2 weeks. We provided housing and hotel stay for our employees who didn't want to go home because they didn't want to expose their families. We provided childcare. So we really moved in to say, how do we keep you safe? And how do we really take care of you during this process? And then, the final thing was that we were going to lead. We were going to be present. That we as Kaiser Permanente were going to get through the pandemic. And so we were just consistent and constant in our message about the education, the content and knowledge about the safety that for our physicians and our employees, and that we would be prepared for the surge. And we knew that, we were able to predict when we were going to have the surge. And we had, I think at the very first surge, which didn't reach the numbers that were projected or predicted, we were looking at increasing our capacity across the country at close to 150%. So.
That's very good. Thank you. I remember a lot of those discussions. I kind of want to shift how you work with the board. You've now been in the role for almost 18 months. I can't believe it's gone by that quickly, Greg. It's just amazing. It's been 18 months. And you've always worked with the board as COO and president, the role you've had before. But now you really have taken a more of a leadership and changed the direction of how we're working and how we're thinking and the strategies and how you're working with the Permanente group, bringing everyone together, moving all the arrows, if you will, in one direction. And so it's driving a different culture, if you will. So since most of the people on this call are board members, maybe you can share with them how you think about the board. Let me rephrase that. How do you work with the board? How have you maybe changed the way you've worked with the board now as chairman? And maybe talk a little bit about the makeup of the board. I know Esther talked a little bit about the diversity of the board, but what also is pretty powerful is the diversity of the experiences of the board members.
Yeah, you know, I actually like our virtual world, and one of the observations I would make is that when we meet in person, there is sort of a formality and an observation, and do I speak? If someone else has spoken, do I kind of pull back? I think what happens with virtual is that there is just tremendous transparency. And there is a kind of an equalization that occurs. And so one of the things that I've observed through this period of time with our board is how some of the kind of tentativeness or the formality has gone away, and that there's just greater engagement and greater transparency in that engagement. So, what I've heard from some of our board members, and what I did hear, was that, my predecessors started with transparency, and over time transparency maybe became less. So a couple of thoughts that I have. One is having a board that is not a gotcha board is really, really important. And I've had boards and been on boards where board members are, there's a competition about who's the smartest and who's maybe more smarter than management. And I would say, we as a board, we don't have that. I mean, people come to the table really bringing their expertise and kind of owning and being in that governance space. I try to lead and engage with the board from the standpoint that management needs the board as an advisor to bring that expertise forward. And there's a way that can be done that really doesn't get into management, that whole, importance of I'm governance, and I'm operating from a governance perspective, and I'm not getting into management. And especially if management is being transparent and really communicating and sharing data and clarity to the board, then it's really important that the board is able to advise and bring that expertise, but not really transition or get into kind of the management role. So one, I think our board is very good at being in governance and being an advisor. And Ramon and other members of our board, I've asked to meet with members of management and to share their journey and to share their learnings. And I think one of the greatest things a board can bring is their experience to management and to the governance table. So I really encourage our leaders to engage with our board members around their expertise and them being kind of that advisor. I think the other thing that I would say is that I have this thing about always address the issue or attack the issue, if you will, but not the person. And we have a board that is able to challenge the thinking of other board members, but do it in a way that it's elevating the totality of the board, and it's elevating kind of the thinking and of management. And I think our board is doing that well, and we'll continue to work on it. But I think there is that constructive dialogue that occurs at our board that is focused not on individuals, but really focused on, as a board, where is our thinking, and are we really kind of contributing and kind of challenging ourselves to make the best decisions. Esther mentioned the diversity. So for me, it is important that we have diversity and expertise. Ramon, tremendous IT experience. We've got somebody from Starbucks that has just amazing marketing experience. So having that kind of diversity that can contribute to leadership and to the organization is important. And that takes us to, Kaiser Permanente forever, as long as I've been a part of the organization, has been focused on making sure that our management and our board represents the communities we serve. So our commitment to diversity and what it brings to the board is the same as our commitment to experience or expertise and what it brings to the board. And we can also feel at times, the board addressing the issue that's related to diversity or opinions about equity and inclusion that is not personal, but it really is about the issue and the organization and moving the organization forward.
That's probably a perfect segue to the next part of this discussion. As we saw what took place May of last year and since May of last year, and with your leadership and the discussions that you had with us on the board about race and equality and so forth, and things that we needed to do internally to keep our house in order, as well as how we're going to do things externally in either the communities we serve or with our membership, the patients that come to Kaiser Permanente. Greg, could you just share what that process that you went through last May and June and how you addressed it with the 220,000 plus employees of Kaiser Permanente and working with the Permanente group and then of course what you communicated externally. Could you share that with us, please?
Be glad to. So, again, Kaiser Permanente has always been this amazing organization, committed to diversity, committed to inclusion. It's a huge part of why I've been with the organization so long. But I was kind of at the time of the George Floyd incident, the organization, and as most organizations in our society, were struggling and in pain, and there were a lot of emotions out there. And as we gave thought to our role and our history, the first thing I did was to say, as good as we are, we're a microcosm of a larger society. We need to understand kind of where are we in terms of systemic racism? Where are we in terms of what our Black and Brown and Asian Pacific Islanders and gay and lesbian and other employees are feeling in the organization, which was a little bit different because normally we're out and we're really articulating. So we took time to look internal to the organization. I spent time meeting with all of our business resource groups. We have a number of those. I heard from our African American and Black employees what they were experiencing in the organization. I heard from our Latino and Latinx employees and from our Asian Pacific Islanders. And I heard from our white population. So we spent time listening and engaging with everyone. We made a commitment to the organization that we would be on a journey of looking at issues of promotion, of looking at issues of leadership, of really owning what we were hearing from our employees. And that as we were owning and moving forward the work within the organization, then we would look external to the organization. So as we put in place a bias training program along at KP, looked at data around marketing. So as we worked all of that through, we also then went external to the organization, and I think we committed some $70 million to looking at what was happening in our country, looking at systemic racism, looking at Black and Brown communities in many of our cities that were impacted by the violence and over time being impacted by the pandemic. I've got visitors, as you notice. So we turned our voice external after we had looked internal to the organization. And we just, I think last week, announced a $7 million grant to a number of organizations that are really looking at systemic racism. How do we understand it? But how do we begin to help Black and Brown and other communities understand how it's impacting them and what they need to do and what others need to do in supporting them to really begin to heal from what we know is created as a result of systemic racism.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with everybody. You know, we do have some questions that have come in. May I read one to you?
Sure.
Excellent. This is a question from a member. It says, how do you see a healthcare system's responsibility of working on social determinants of health to improve the community's health, and how has COVID affected this approach?
Yeah, great question, Juan. So thank you for it. You know, healthcare is, you know, we've been a leader in addressing healthcare disparities for some time. But we have to understand and accept the root causes of disparities in healthcare and in other parts of our society, and the issues of wealth, the issues of education, the issues of access. I mean, those are very real issues. And as you know, an $88 billion healthcare organization, we have to use and we must use our dollars, our voice, our efforts to advocate on a large scale so that we as a nation and as society own and understand those issues. We will always have healthcare disparities as long as we have in this country the kind of disparities that we have in education and wealth. I mean, we'll always have, right? So we are, somebody asked me, I was on a panel the other day and they said, gee, should we be in that lane? And I said, that is our lane. I mean, healthcare is about creating the kinds of equality in our society that allows everybody the opportunity to have the health outcomes that the dominant population has had. So I think it is absolutely our lane. I think we have, you know, we've invested in a company, Unite Us. We've got a system called Thrive Local that we're putting in place across the nation that is really integrating the social disparities of the social resources into our kind of care model. So when we think about the evolution of care at Kaiser Permanente, it is about kind of physical health, it is about mental health, and it is about social health. And we believe that we've got to integrate all of those together. We are, and you get me going, Ramon, and I kind of get excited about this, but there is an effort that Robert Smith from Vistas is starting where we're looking at how do we identify, and he's identified like 13 cities in the country where we've got Black and Brown kind of populations at a significant number, and we've got big disparities, and asking corporations to come together and let's understand the opportunities around education. Let's understand the opportunities around wealth, and let's understand the criminal justice system and all those things that we must begin to address to create kind of the opportunity for people to have equalization in terms of healthcare and other aspects, if you will.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. We do have another question I'd like to ask you. It says, I'm wondering what the view of Kaiser's board is on the infodemic, that's their word, not mine, that is deterring Latinx and Black communities from wanting to get vaccinated. Are you looking at a different approach to contribute to the efforts of states and municipalities to get through to these communities?
Yeah, great question. And so a couple of things. One, from the beginning, we've been focused on how do we deal with the hesitancy in our Black and Brown communities in particular. I will tell you that in some ways, the belief that that great hesitancy exists in Black and Brown communities is overstated. We actually, through this pandemic, have had members of the Black and Brown community reaching out and saying, where are you? How do you, we need you. I mean, how do we get the vaccine into our communities, into our churches, into our families? So I do think that we started off saying great hesitancy and, the Tuskegee, and for all these reasons, we're seeing, and I think the nation is seeing, that the greatest hesitancy is not necessarily coming from the Black and Brown community. At the same time, there is hesitancy. There is an opportunity for education. And so we are working with churches. We have mobile vans that are in place. We have teams that are going out and doing education. So that is underway. But I do want to say that our Black and Brown people are stepping up and wanting to be vaccinated. I think that the greatest hesitancy, and we won't get into the politics, but we're looking at about 30% of the nation, about 80 million people, who are saying that they either are saying strongly or less than strongly will not get the vaccine. That is really coming more from the past year and a half, and from some of the political rhetoric that's occurred around the pandemic. And so that is probably our greatest challenge. So Black and Brown people are really, I think, very, or not very, but not as hesitant as people as kind of framed it.
Well, Greg, when I went down in Indio, California, to get my Moderna shot, there were a heck of a lot of Latinos getting shots. So, and it was so well organized. I was totally impressed, and I sent a note to the head medical director in the Coachella Valley how well organized that team was and how they made people feel really comfortable about getting a shot and caring about them and so forth. So I know the Kaiser is really trying hard to get people attracted and wanting to do this.
Right. If I could, and I think Esther mentioned this, when you look at the Black and Brown community, we have had just the greatest burden through this pandemic. I mean, so we are the people that have been touched most. So we've lost, families have been lost. Right. So people understand the real risk and want access to the vaccine. So, I just think it's important that as we kind of learn from this pandemic, and it's still there. We're announcing, Ramon, I think today, that we're sending $5 million worth of supplies to India. So we're not out of this, but when you think about the communities that have borne the brunt of this, there is no doubt about who has experienced the pain and continues to experience the pain. So we are getting vaccinated. And it's, for personally, it's rather devastating for me to understand what's happened to our people and what we're experiencing, and then see people who are positioned differently have actually pulled out. And, we won't get out of this until we get to herd immunity, and we need that 30%. Frankly, who, again, I would say is not Black and Brown, or certainly not just Black and Brown, to step up and to really own the science and get vaccinated.
Well, thank you for that. There's a question more about board members. Matter of fact, there's a couple. So I'm gonna go back to this one question about there's no secret that boards of many large healthcare companies lack Latinos. Only 21% of healthcare companies have Latinos on their boards. Kaiser Permanente, with 2 Latinos on board, is leading the way in this area. What are you, Kaiser Permanente, and the industry at large doing to increase the Latino representation on the boards, especially in the state of California, where we have 38% of Californians are Latinos?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we've kind of always been there in terms of diversity. 40% of our board members are Black and Latino. Right. And again, so we are absolutely committed to diversity. We're also committed to that experience that we discussed. And we're also committed to raising up and really partnering with organizations such as this organization, others, to make sure that not only are we learning as board members and kind of expanding our ability to contribute, but also that we are kind of bringing forward people who can fulfill these board roles. So we're partnering with organizations, partnering with a number of the search firms, the consulting firms to really look at. I was actually talking to one of the search firms yesterday about people within our organization, and actually they were all women. They were all Latino or Latinx and African American that we were putting forward to be groomed to be board members. So I think we've got a responsibility to make sure we are kind of bringing people on, but we also have a responsibility to make sure that we are developing people of Latinx and African American and Asian, so that they are prepared to serve on boards. So I think there's work that we both have to do to really make sure that the population is there. The other thing I think for us is that, we go back to, we are committed to making sure that our board and our leadership represents the communities we serve. So it also starts with who are we hiring within the organization that can go out and kind of participate in a leadership role at the board level. And our leadership team is also intentionally very diverse for that reason.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Grover Vargas has a question. It says, in your experience, which are the top 3 qualities that a board member should bring to an organization?
Well, I think it's great when they bring a sense of humor.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, as Ramon does. But I think, really, management, as I think we all know, you've been there. I mean, it's intense and people are leading. And, when I walk into the board room, I want to know that I am kind of in the presence of people who not only support the mission of the organization, but they're there to lift up leadership and to lift up management, so that they can go out and continue to do. So humor, support, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I've got a serious governance role, but I also have a role of really supporting this team, so that they can be the best. And I mentioned, not a got you, but really we're here. We're kind of, so I think that is hugely important. I think, kind of a sense of inquiry that, again, supports but challenges leadership and management to be more than they may see, more than what's in front of them. And I think our board is constantly looking at, but what else is out there and what other opportunities, or how much further can we go? So I'm not there just dealing with the day, but I'm there as a governance, also looking toward the future and really looking for where is the organization going. So this sense of vision, I think is really important. And then I think, the third one you've heard me say is the ability to be governance and not be management, and to kind of, ask and engage at the level that challenges management, but doesn't really take on the management.
Very good. Thank you. That's good. I actually wrote that down for myself. So
you do it well. You do it well.
Well, thank you. I think this is recorded, so that's great. Gilbert Vasquez has a question about the California legislature recently passed AB 962, the Hospital Supplier Diversity Act, which will require hospitals to submit reports on minority procurement. Kaiser's California Latino patient revenue is $25 billion, or 40%. Does Kaiser have a plan to increase Latino participation with procurement and upper management?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes. We actually have, we've been a leader in supplier diversity. This past year, I think we approached about $2.4 billion that was spent, and I don't have the exact numbers for Latino, but that was spent with diverse underrepresented small businesses, and we are actually committed to increasing that. And a few weeks ago, I actually approved kind of the goal for increasing it. So we're at about 2.4, and over the next 5 years, we're actually shooting for that. If I remember correctly, kind of getting up to about $3.5 billion. So we are absolutely committed. We've got a team of people who engage regularly, and it is Latinx, African American, women, and all of it also is kind of connected to a sustainable environment. So I think we, in many ways, lead the country in what we're doing in terms of diverse purchasing of supplies.
I already knew the answer, but I'm glad you answered it. And I think
I should have just said, Ramon, you can answer that.
No, I totally agree. So, we're going to shift here a little bit. It's my friend David Guzman has a question. Says, while the pandemic has been an incredible challenge, within the dark clouds are opportunities. For example, the pandemic has accelerated the digital transformation already underway. How is Kaiser Permanente changing to take advantage of this opportunity?
That's my favorite question, and you can answer this one also, but I'll start and then you can finish. So, yes, it was just amazing what happened during the early phase of the pandemic. We went from doing about 15% of our total visits being virtual to 80% of all visits shifting to virtual. We've also built in a quality component or looking at trying to make sure, are we providing the right care through the right vehicle? We've now stabilized at about 40 to 50% virtual, and we're continuing to look at where should we land and what care going forward should be provided through the virtual venue as a part of our strategic plan. And I have to tell you, there was something about doing a strategic plan in the middle of a pandemic that things just fell away, and our ability to be objective, to understand the market, to understand where we were not performing where we needed to and what we need to do. People were just so much more receptive. So we accomplished through the pandemic what probably would have taken us 5 years to do. So the movement of 80% virtual and now looking at where that will land. Pharmacy mail order went from being into the low 35% of our drugs being distributed through mail order to upwards of, I think, 50+%. And so we're looking at what of those do we hardwire going forward. Our members, our society is really ready to accept virtual, to accept digital in a way that we were not before. Our board approved an expenditure of about $2.5 billion over the next 5 years into our really kind of developing and evolving our digital strategy. We have this amazing digital team on board that is kind of building out our digital program. During the pandemic, I think we developed over a matter of weeks 13 applications that were about navigating, that were about symptoms, that was largely about care. Artificial intelligence being built into the digital program. So the other thing I would say, so yes, we're on the journey, digital first, care via digital, education via digital, and really committed to owning that space. In the strategic plan, by 9/30 of this year, we will have across the country urgent virtual care on demand. So if you're a Kaiser Permanente member, you will be able to go virtual with an urgent care issue, not have to go to an urgent care center physically, and have a physician available to you. The other thing, though, that I would want to call out that we are needing to own and are beginning to kind of work through now is how do we make sure that we are addressing the digital divide, and particularly in underrepresented communities, Black, Brown, we want to make sure that as we move toward digital, that our members and our communities have the tools and the resources to engage? And if they don't, what are we doing about it? And how are we making sure that they have access to care? And it may not be digital. So large digital agenda. We really see, and the pandemic really, we were already going there, but the pandemic just accelerated not only members and people's acceptance, but also our clinicians' ability to understand that they could provide care digitally and get the same, or virtually, and get the right outcome. So huge shift in culture and mindset.
I totally agree with that. I would only add one more thing, Greg. When you and I talked about the digital strategy, the spring of 2020, right? It was right before the pandemic hit. We were having that dialogue. One of the things that needed to happen was we needed to fund it. So we talked about funding, and one was to break down the obstacles. And that needed to happen at your level. And you did that. And one thing I would say to everybody here is leadership matters. When it comes to driving digital across the organization, if your senior level leaders aren't behind it and they're all not moving in the same direction, it's going to fail. So I just want to say thank you. That was a huge, huge challenge. I think we're about at our time. I don't know if there's any last questions, but I want to thank you all for the questions you submitted. I didn't even have to ask. They just showed up. It was fantastic. But I think, Greg, is there any final thoughts, any final things you'd like to share?
Well, I want to acknowledge you and to say thank you to you as a board member. I remember when Ramon came on the board, as you probably know, he's a little bit outspoken and extroverted. He is able to really lead and to not only, represent himself, but he absolutely does a phenomenal job in helping our board to process and to kind of own what's in front of us. So I just want to acknowledge Ramon, just an outstanding board member, and has contributed, is contributing, and will continue to contribute to kind of the greatness of Kaiser Permanente. So Ramon, thank you.
Well, thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it. So Esther, thank you for having LCDA allow us to join you. And I don't know if you want to share anything before we end.
Oh, no, just wow. That's a very, very worthwhile and amazing conversation. Thank you for the candor and really engaging the questions that were coming in. It was just a perfect and great timing for such important topics. And one for everyone. Everyone's going to get a survey. Please give us your input. And we really look forward to continuing our work with Kaiser Permanente, with you, Greg, and your amazing team. I will say that, when Bernard Tyson passed unexpectedly, and clearly he was a big fan of ours, and you are too. I remember thinking about your team, Anthony Bauretta and the rest of the folks that work with you and others. And I remember the response was like, Bernard did a great job to leave a leadership team that is going to keep all the trains moving on time without a glitch, and the next person's coming in. And that to me was like, yes, everyone was mourning and he's losing, another phenomenal leader. But I just wanted to share, what I had heard, because we obviously stay close with our friends at Kaiser, and I think that's not only a legacy for Bernard, but you who were in your role as president and then stepping in. And clearly, I think somebody mentioned in the chat that, Greg, you really articulated very clearly and well, just on every point. It just really came across like they picked the right person clearly, and Ramon really helps keep everyone in line. So we want to really thank you again for that insight and candor, and it helps a great deal for the kind of work we do and the work that the members do on their own board to bring this learning to their experience. So Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll
Thanks,
see you soon,
everyone.
Greg. Take care,
Got
Esther.
it. Take care.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.